A step behind the sun laid itself across our backyard like a blanket left in a warm dryer. The grass had gone long on me, wheat tips where I kept meaning to mow, and the dandelions were a whole confetti S-worth. Evan chased after a puffball I'd blown for him, arms stretched, the sleeves of his blue shirt flapping like he was half bird. It was quiet enough to hear the house breathe, the fridge's tiny thrum behind me, the faint rattle of the vent hood, even though I'd turned it off, the living room fan clicking at that one loose chain where I kept saying I'd get the ladder out and tighten it. I held my coffee in the window like I always did at that hour, and the mug's heat didn't bite the way it did in winter. The pain was cool against my wrist bone. He ran and flopped, a little wind-up toy with knees that still couldn't decide if they trusted dirt. His shadow stretched long across the lawn, thin with the hour, a charcoal smear aiming toward the lilac bushes. And then there was the other thing. I thought it was a trick of the glass. I wiped a circle with my sleeve and leaned closer. Under him, peeling away and falling back in, there was a second dark shape that kept the beat like a backup singer. It stayed a half foot off his right side. When he giggled and went on his butt, both shadows bent. When he stood and reached, the extra stood and reached, a breath behind. I didn't move. I watched the way a person watches a boiling pot, expecting it to turn back into what I knew pot-watching did. When he tipped and caught himself with his palms, he'd always been top-heavy, the extra S hands came down a blink slower. I set my coffee on the sill and pressed my palm flat to the glass, feeling that faint outside chill. A freight train whispered miles off. Our house was aligned so the sound slid down the street nice and even, like somebody opening a long zipper. "Evan," I said, when I couldn't stand the stillness in my chest, "come stand by Mama." It came out softer than I meant to. He didn't hear me. He wanted the puff, and he wanted to get every last seed, and he wanted 5 things at once like he always did. A bee bumped the screen. I stepped back from the sink and got the door open, and the metal strip at the threshold caught my heel, and I swore under my breath the way I tried not to in front of him. Outside, the smell of mown, whatever the neighbors had mowed yesterday, came up at me. There was a high whine of something over on Elm, maybe a trimmer, maybe somebody fixing a thing. The boy kept chasing, puff sucking across the lawn. He was turned away, the round of his ear shining, the little patch of hair where I'd missed trimming behind it looking ragged. Shadows lay out long and cool on the grass, and the extra shadow sat almost inside his, then rolled away when he moved like oil doesn't quite wash out of a shirt even after 2 good cycles. "Evan," I said again, louder now. "Buddy." He stopped because I said his name that way. He turned, and his face came over the light. He squinted at me, then figured out I didn't sound mad, then smiled. His 2 front teeth were still half their grown in size. He smiled like he was new to sunlight and liked it fine. "Come up," I said. "Time for water." He trudged my direction. As he crossed the lawn, his shadow and the other one slid under the playset and came out the other side. The swings moved a little without wind. The slide made the sound plastic makes when it warms, a little settling. He got to me and I went small to meet him, and he tipped into my knees because that's how he always did, trusting my legs like they were a fence he'd tested 100 times. I got him a little cup of water from the tap. The faucet knocked when I turned it, loose pipes or air in the line, and he drank like a kid who'd just remembered his tongue lived in a dry mouth. He set the cup down on the counter carefully. He'd finally learned to set things without slamming. While he drank, I looked past his ear and into the light where the yard lay. Our maple made a big puddle of shade near the fence. Closer to the house, the sun made everything honest. Nothing moved in that space but a scatter of gnats where the soil stayed damp by the spigot. His shadow was a puddle at his feet now because he was right under the porch roof. There was only that one, a normal dark. I reached behind him and ran my hand down his back to feel the heat he carried. It was warm, but not the fever heat that terrifies you. His shoulder blades under his shirt were little bird wings. "Did you find it?" I said, chin toward the lawn. "Gone," he said. "It flew the wrong way." He made the F with his bottom lip and grinned because he liked how it felt. I drew the screen and shut the door and set the little hook latch in case he got ideas about pushing it open and bolting without asking. He didn't do that much anymore, but habit had its uses. The fridge kicked louder, then softer, and I thought about the light in the basement that wouldn't turn off even with the chain pulled, and how I'd promised myself this was the week I sorted that. Small things make a house feel like it, as sliding past your grip, even when you've got both hands on the rail. He mashed his cup back to a circle he preferred and asked for crackers with his look. I shook the sleeve into my palm and gave him 2. His gums worked at them soft-sided because his mouth hadn't decided how to be a big kid S yet. Then he ran to the sliding glass and pressed his fingers to it, leaving good prints I'd wipe later with vinegar. I watched as his reflection overlapped the yard. His outline and the grass and the sun all made their own sandwich, out there, where the yellow lay. The second shadow rose back out of the light, like it hadn't been gone at all, just crouched. It found his shadow the way oil finds a rag and darkens it first where there's already a stain. It kept its distance the tiniest bit more this time. "This is the part where you tell yourself what it is," I said, in a voice not for him. "And then you fix lunch." I put water in a pot and set it on the back burner because I am not a fool with toddlers and front burners. I looked at the clock that's always wrong in the kitchen because I never quite get around to synchronizing it with the one on the microwave. The minute hand shuddered the way it does when the minute heaves itself into a new spot, a tiny tick backward before it goes forward. Long minute. Some days it doesn't feel like time wants what you've got. From the backyard came the soft swish of his shoe against grass as he started up again. He took steps like he was satisfied a little and could start fresh with a new game. I could tell by the pace. I kept my hand on the pot, not because it needed me, but because it was something to keep that hand from clenching. A fly tapped at the window and got itself down to the corner where the screen doesn't quite meet the frame. It took the smart way out. I watched it go and told myself, shadows look odd in late sun. The neighbor's sycamore throws stripes. Kids snag everything in their eyes and echo it. Light is light and perspective does magic you don't need to name. But when I turned fully to watch him again, his little head cocked around, the near light kind of glare in his hair, the dark shape to his right made a move without waiting. He raised his arms and it raised one fraction behind, and then before he dropped them, it dipped a shoulder the way a person does when they about to whisper in someone's ear. He turned his head to catch a sound. I saw it in his neck muscles, and the extra bent further as if to slip itself in. I shut the stove and went out, bare toes to the boards, the porch splinters catching right where the paint had started to peel last winter. The air cools you, and then warms you, and then cools you again on a day like that, as if it can't decide whether to act like a blanket or a wet cloth. The creak in the third step was loud under my heel. I went off the porch into the grass, and the grass held a little water nearer the spigot. I got my sandals wet, I didn't care. He was a dozen feet from me and had gone into that quiet trance kids do when something makes sense to them, and that sense is more interesting than anything grown. I went to him, and he looked up like, "Oh, you." He lifted his hand, palm white with the bits of dandelion that had stuck to it, and I took that hand. It was warm and sticky. "Inside," I said, and he let me. As I turned him and we walked, it felt like walking away from nothing. That's the thing. Nothing has weight sometimes. I thought about how idiotic it was to think you could turn your back on light and make the dark go where you said. Still, we went in, and I latched the hook and pulled the curtain half over the glass. The curtain was thin and coughed motes into the air, and the room let itself dim one notch I liked. He resisted a little, eyes going back over his shoulder because his games were out there, and I was a thief. I put him on the floor with blocks. He hummed to them. He always made a sound like an old refrigerator when he concentrated. The actual fridge hummed back, and I realized our house had a full conversation all the time if you were willing to listen. I dumped the pot and went to the sink and ran the water. The sound filled me out. I breathed over it until I thought it would be fine. When I cut the water, the instant afterwards was loud. You never notice how much your day is built from small noises until they stop. By dinner, the sun was lower and the house took on that amber it gets that makes you think you did more with the day than you did. He ate his noodles with half the sauce on his face, and I kissed the spot by his mouth that was clean. I watched the window because that's what I was now. It had gone from a piece of glass I saw through to a thing that needed watching. Outside, the lawn held our afternoon dents. I told myself my brain had caught a loop and would wear it out if I kept walking it. It didn't. That night, after I got him down and lay a while in the doorway like I do when his breathing changes down into the ocean place, I found myself downstairs with the porch light on and the kitchen light off. The yard turned into a flat black sheet with stars poked through, and there's nothing to see then except the reflection of yourself. But I watched anyway. The porch bulb made its own circle. Moths found it and buzzed and did their moth religion around it until they hit themselves worn. I told myself I'd talk to Barbara down the block in the morning. She worked at the high school and always had something solid to say and knew how to bat bats out of your hair and take jars out of your hands without breaking them. I told myself a thing said out loud is different than the same thing thought, and if I let it touch air, I'd hear it and fix it. And then I went to bed and slept the sleep a person does when they build a barricade out of checklists and stand behind it with a broom as a spear. You're ready. You just don't know what for. In the morning, the light came in with that butter spread that makes you forgive 12 things before coffee. He got his freckles a degree darker every week. He woke full and ready and pointed at the cereal like he'd invented it. I set his bowl and turned the box just so to keep him interested in the things on the back while I got the milk. The carton had a sour nose when I pulled it. I swore, checked the date, found myself frowning at numbers I must have misread yesterday. I got him toast instead and told him we'd debrave the store because Mama had messed up her count. He nodded at this because going anywhere in the van felt like an expedition. He put his shoes on the wrong feet, handed me one sock like a carnation, and waited by the door while I found my keys. You'd think I'd keep them on the hook I hung for that purpose. I found them under yesterday's mail, under the fruit bowl, under the little library book with the elephant on the cover. I think the house moves things just to let me know I'm alive. On our way down the sidewalk, the town made town noises. The garbage truck with a squeal in one break, the kid next door dribbling, then losing the ball under a car, then swearing in a way he thought wasn't swearing yet. The morning held a thin chill under its warmth. It felt like a quarter in the bottom of a pool. I set Evan in his seat and clicked and tightened. He watched a cloud like he could influence the shape it chose. We pulled onto Maple, then up the hill toward the main road. At the four-way, the light had gone wonky. It cycled quick, then held yellow long. It had been like that for a week, and the town had talked about it in the way the town talks about anything. A dozen versions, a dozen reasonings. Somebody blamed the heat, somebody blamed new sensors. Mr. Pryor down at the hardware store said the signal on Lawrence had been iffy for years, and we were fools to trust machines to tell us when to move our feet. He sold me a screwdriver with a smile when I came in looking for filters last month and told me I was doing better than I thought. He means things when he says them, which is rare. I watched the light and counted under my breath in a way I didn't quite mean to. A habit from when I scared myself and learned that counting gives your hand something to hold. The light held yellow for 7 out of the 8 beats I've ever seen it hold. When it went red, an SUV coasted through anyway, driver's head down like a person reading a text. A horn sounded. The air made that tightness it makes after. We went to the grocery. My list lived in my head like always, and I forgot 2 things like I always do. We stood by the milk, and I checked dates like a woman who didn't want to play this game twice in a week. He pulled the corner of a label until I told him that label wasn't tea hours to pull. He shrugged and let me lift him into the cart seat. I wiped it with one of the wet wipes they keep there for people like me who need to touch the world less sometimes. Under the groceries lights, everybody looks a little ghostly. The hum is constant, and there's a vibration to the freezers you only hear if you stand still longer than you should. I moved down the bread aisle, and the little barcode beeps made a song with the piped music. Evan reached toward a box with a cartoon. I steered us to the plain end of the shelf and told him we had our brand, which is just the brand that was cheapest the day I decided we'd have a brand. Near the checkout, there's a black mat by the gum. If you stand on the mat and look up, there's a convex mirror so they can watch sticky fingers. The mirror showed us squat and rounded and a little wrong. We rolled into that spot, and I saw us, me in my same hoodie I've been promising to replace because the elbows are thin. Him with his hair doing its own thing, and right next to us in the fisheye, we were doubled by the shiny of the freezer door's curved edge, which was normal, which I'd seen 100 times. Except our shadow in the mirror didn't behave like the bright above us said it should. It dragged a step behind the cart, then moved up, then eased closer to the boy like a person in line at a counter, not wanting to be rude. I could hear the gum in my jaw. I wasn't chewing, but I could hear it. The scanner beeped fast with our stuff. The cashier had a chipped snowman mug, even though it was May, because that was her mug, and she wasn't going to pretend she didn't like it out of season. The belt squeaked at a spot in the middle. The little printer spit our receipt with a curl that hit my wrist. I took it. The ink was fresh and stinked, like it always did if you sniffed, which I always forgot not to. On the paper, our items added to a number I could talk to, and the tax did its neat calculation. The receipt named things we had, and the few things I didn't get around to, which receipts don't tell you, but should. On the way out, the doors swished and did their gracious whoosh, and outside, under that white bright, the asphalt went shiny where the sprinklers had overreached. The van made its click that meant the key was where it needed to be. The radio gave me static on the station that usually gives me some chatter from a morning show with 3 people laughing at not much. The static raised my skin. I shut it. At the intersection, the light had made its choice to be a problem again. It held us longer. That's the kind of thing I tell myself doesn't matter, then find myself talking about it to someone later, like it had been my whole day. As we waited, Evan said nothing and hummed a note only he could hear. His feet tapped and his shoes knocked together. I looked in the mirror at him. There's a spot where the mirror shows you your kid and a sliver of what's beside him. There, the window frame threw a line of shadow across the seat. And there too, I thought I saw something gather by his elbow, something like a fold of dark, settling into a shape. I turned too fast. It jumped back into what shadow does when you look at it full. The light turned green as if to embarrass me. I went. We got home and put the milk in the fridge and the bread in the bread box that isn't a tier box but a drawer, and the apples in the bowl that used to be grandma's. And the receipt went into the drawer with the others, because that's just how I do it, even if I rarely look at them, until something about a number keeps me from sleeping, and I go and do math at 2 in the morning with a pen that skips. I made him his lunch. The knife stuck a bit in the tomato because I have not had it sharpened in too long. I told myself while I cut that I'd take it down to Prior S and ask what he could do. He'd tell me to be careful, like he always did, and I'd feel mothered by a man 20 years older than me in a way that made me grateful and irritated both at once. The afternoon had that pause in it that comes after lunch, when the house considers a nap. He pushed his trucks into one corner and made little road sounds. The radiator gave one ping because some leftover heat found a place to announce itself. Outside, the hour took its time going where it was going. I didn't pull the curtain this time. I watched out where the light came into our yard and thought about how some truths done to get smaller when you stack hours on them. They just sit and wait you out. Around 3, I heard the distant horn they blow when the plant lets out for a shift change. The sound comes up the river and finds the streets like smoke. I think about the people who hear that and feel their bodies lean toward their cars. I think about the bodies that are done for the day and how they only feel done for a minute. And then there's dinner, and there's laundry, and there's the one light in the back hall that keeps burning because nobody can find the right bulb size. The knock at the door was a gentle one, like who had knocked had practiced how not to wake someone if they were sleeping. I wiped my hands on the towel with the faded strawberries that I should be retired but couldn't tea because my aunt had given it to me the winter after Mom died. And I went. It was Barbara with her bag that always looked like it had more in it than physics allowed. "You got a minute?" she said, and I stepped back because you always make space for the person whose voice carries the weather in it. She set her bag on the chair, the one with a wobble I hadn't gotten to, and looked around like she does when she wants to see if I am the kind of fine she can accept. "I'm making a run to the pharmacy," she said, "and I am picking up anyone S wants so they don't have to drag every body and wagon with them. You good on medicines and band-aids and whatnot?" I watched her eyes flick to the sink and to the toy corner and to the wall where a crack had opened in the paint last year when we had that cold snap. It's not judgment, it's inventory, and it cares. "I'm good," I said. "We just came back from the store. Milk fought me yesterday, but I fixed it." She looked toward the glass door. Her reflection crossed mine, and our house doubled us in a way that made me think of the convex mirror and the way the freezer doors had given us extra selves. The yard lay out like a stage. The maple was putting out seed helicopters. One spun close to the glass and stuck. "You look like you haven't slept all the way through," she said, and when I made a shape with my mouth, she said, "It's all right. I've seen worse. You want to say the thing or you want to say another thing and then circle back?" She's never in a hurry on purpose. It makes you feel both seen and a little mad because you want to pretend what you have is normal, and she won't let normal be the thing you offer when it isn't. "I saw a thing in the yard yesterday," I said. "A shadow where it shouldn't be. It moved how it shouldn't. It was near him." She didn't smile because she's not that kind. She also didn't rush to tell me what science would say because she knows how scientists sound when they haven't put a small boy in their picture of cause and effect. "In that light," she said, "our yards double up. That maple throws something weird comes 4 o'clock. My niece gets 2 of herself every day by the fence post. Looks like a trick, but all it is sun through that gap between the houses. We get a second sun for 5 minutes. Feels like it anyway." "I know about fence shadows," I said, and I felt my ears go warm because I hate hearing myself sound like a person who wants to correct a kindness. This was different. She drew air into herself like she was tasting it for ash. "Sometimes," she said, "different is just different, and sometimes it's the thing itself, and it keeps being the thing. You want me to sit a while and watch the yard with you and say what I see? I got 10 minutes before I got to get Kay from practice." I nodded because it was 10 minutes where I wasn't alone with my head. We stood side by side, 2 women whose lives had boiled down to smaller circles than they had once, and who knew how to stand without leaning. A breeze got up and ran its hand through the lilacs and pushed the smell through the screens. Somewhere a dog barked that had more to say about his barking than about the thing he was barking at. For 5 minutes nothing happened at all. The maple played with light the way it always did. A squirrel made his tight zigzags. A cloud came, refused to be a cloud that mattered, and left. For a second, the sun went behind a telephone pole, and the yard made a new map, and then the light returned and flattened it again. Barbara shifted her weight so her left hip would quit complaining. Then I saw it start to happen again. The darker shape gathered under the brightness as a darker damp shows up in a towel that hasn't had time to air. It lifted off the ground a hair, a nothing. If I'd blinked bigger, I'd have missed it. It pushed a little toward the porch. It had no edges until I admitted it did have edges, and then they sharpened, as if my naming helped it. The other shadow stayed lazy and compliant under the trees. This one had a mind to it. "There," I said, too loud. Barbara didn't jump, which I appreciated. She lifted her chin a fraction and tracked where mine went. The shape held its inches gained and then slipped back, no, not back, apart from the simple math of light. She inhaled and exhaled through her nose like smelling it helped. "I see a dip," she said, careful. "I see your maple doing tricks. That limb up there, it's got a kink. You see how the neighbor's garage roof catches the flare? Maybe this is all like..." The darker shape slid again while she talked, and in the corner of my sight I watched it reach that half foot we had yesterday and then find a new inch. She stopped. Her mouth set itself. She looked at me and didn't say what she hadn't wanted to say in the first place. "Okay," she said finally, not to me so much as to the light. "Okay." She stayed her 10. When she left, she squeezed my wrist. "I'll talk to Pete about coming by to fix that backlight. He's good with hands, and he needs a thing. You tell me if you get where it's too noisy in your head. I'll take him for a ride. Boys like cars." When she went, the house took a breath like someone had unlatched a door. Evan stirred and said something in his nap talk. I sat in the doorway to his room and watched him be asleep for 5 minutes to scrub my head. Kids make their own weather when they sleep. You stand in it and get better. By evening, the town had done what towns do and decided it had a problem and should name it out loud to test whether the name made the problem feel smaller. The substation out near the old feed mill had hiccuped, they said. "We'd get a brownout tonight," while they swapped a thing inside a box none of us know the name of. "Set your clocks in the morning if they're the kind that lose themselves. Keep your fridge shut. If you're on a machine that needs steady power, go to the high school gym where they'd set up the generator." The message came through phone and radio, and the town page where people argue about flags on porches and whether kids should be on bikes without helmets. The advisory made households move in a way you could feel, even if you weren't teeing them. I put a flashlight on the counter and found the other one that doesn't have a back because it lost it under the couch sometime around Christmas. I tested the tap and looked inside pots and saw that nobody had left a spoon on a burner, and no towel had decided to drape itself where it shouldn't tea. I set a bowl inside the freezer for ice in case it got long. We never get long here, but the body likes to be right, even if you don't need what you brought. I kept Evan close. His shadow kept to him in the living room, with the curtains pulled half, like a dog that knows how close to stand when you're cooking. When the power sagged, it didn't go black. It slouched. The refrigerator sighed down to a lower self. The living room fan made a decision to be a slow fan. The TV gave up its brightness, and the people on it turned into faces with less detail and more patience. The house made small complaints in the walls, as if all its wires had wanted this nap and now had an excuse. The porch light was nothing now but a smudge against glass. In the yard, in that different dark, the shapes sharpened. Streetlights always make a new geometry, and under this one the trees drew themselves insistently. I didn't want to look. I did. I stood at the glass and watched the place where the extra had come up in the afternoon. It came up again with insolence. It came closer. It slid along the ground without lifting like a slug leaving its line. It stopped near the steps where the porch boards begin and tested the bottom stair with the way darkness pushes into cracks when you open a door to a basement that has never truly warmed. It sat there and learned the shape of our stair. "You can't learn stairs," I said, "because words put shapes on things, and sometimes shapes fence you in." Behind me, the flashlight made its small half-moon on the counter. Behind me, the boy made a whimper in his sleep. That meant he'd seen a dog in his dream, and the dog had made a noise that wasn't a bark. I did 3 things at once because see how I am when fear comes and brings the parts of me that know how to act. I pulled the curtain all the way across. I clicked the porch light in a move that said to myself, "See, light is light even when it's tired," and I checked the front door latch. The night was a long apron. It covered us. In that thick, I boiled water for tea on the gas and calmed myself with the neatness of flame that doesn't need the grid. The kettle gave out a small breath I like better than any whistle. I poured and put my hands around the mug and stood in the kitchen pretending that a person like me doesn't make bargains with air. The next day, I told myself I'd test my theory. That the thing. You creep toward an experiment like you, re-brushing the hair of a dog you don't know. You go slow. You keep your voice low inside your head so it doesn't hear you thinking. I took Evan out early when the sun was up high enough to be obedient. I set a chair on the grass where the spot had been. I put his blocks outside and gave him his sippy cup and told him we were going to have a picnic, even though a picnic usually needs a blanket and some boxes that look like presents. He clapped, because any new word is a celebration when you're that size. He set the blocks in color piles that only made sense to his sense. I sat and watched the ground near the porch. For a time, nothing made the air itchy. The grass poured itself into the day, and insects did their back-breaking insect chores in the stems. The maple owned its yawn. I breathed and felt my breath get deeper. The body remembers how to relax too. The shape I feared did not come, and I told myself this: if it was a trick of the angle, it would show now, noon being noon. If it was a trick, I could tell Barbara that. If it was a trick, my head could climb down. Evan rolled onto his back and laughed at the sky because it had done one of those moves where it looks like the clouds are chasing each other, but it's really you that's moving. His laughter put a hole in my fright. I stepped into the kitchen for a second to set our lunch plates on the counter so the ants didn't get ideas. In the 3 steps there and the 3 steps back, something in the yard had changed the way a number changes when one of its digits shifts over a place. The dark lay in the grass like a stain, rounder now, as if it had taken a breath. It was not where I'd left my chair's shadow. It was front right of the chair. It was stubbornly itself. It edged toward the boy's foot as he kicked at a clover flower. You don't impress anyone with how slowly you can panic. My body wanted to run, and my head wanted to reason, and my hands went cold at the same time. I went to him and lifted him under his arms, and he wasn't too ready to be lifted, and he did the heavy thing kids do when they become their own sandbags. I got him anyway and set him on my hip and walked him into the house so fast we bumped the doorframe. He cried a short protest that wasn't fear. It was a schedule complaint. I wiped his nose. I did not look back at the threshold as I shut the door in case it had decided it could find me better if I gave it my eyes. We spent the next hour in the living room while he made trucks be trucks and while I tried to make a list properly the way a grown person does when their day has holes. The pen worked until it didn't. When I retraced its ink, it worked again. That felt like a thing that matters when it doesn't. You get like that when your mind keeps turning a piece of something over. Every tiny trouble is evidence for the case. Post-lunch, he slept hard. He always does after a morning outside. I stood in the hall and let my fingers run over the paint where it's smooth in some places and scabbed in others, and thought about the time a bird got in the house through the attic and how we waited in the kitchen until the fluttering thumped itself against the window and then found the open door and the freedom of it. The fear that day was frenetic. This one was patient. Around 3, the town gave us another message. Water had tested high for something they didn't want to name beyond the number. It was a temporary thing, they said. Boil if you're nervous, which no one wants to hear because nervous is the thing you become, and then you have to stand around with it in your pocket. The factory had let something go on Monday, or maybe not. Maybe it was the line repair by the bridge, where they de-patched something into the dead of night and we heard it in our bones. For now, they said, drink from bottles if you can, boil if you cannot. The gym had water. The school had water. Come get it if you need it. Barbara texted me the same minute. You want me to grab you a case? Don't say no. I said yes because I'm not a fool. 10 minutes later, I had water lined up by the door like soldiers. After she left, I went to the sink and ran it anyway because the mind does that. And the smell that came up from the tap had a sweet cut to it that reminded me of the way the slow river sometimes smelled in July. I shut it. The advisory made people different. You could hear it and you could see it. Cars lined up by the school. The little parking lot across from the feed store, filled with folks who never parked there because it always had glass in it and everybody knows better. People carried things differently. The checkout clerk at the grocery would have carried a box of canned tomatoes the same way last week, and it wouldn't have told me everything I needed to know about her day. Today, it did. I know that sounds like drama. Maybe it is. When what's outside your door begins to shove you a little, what's inside stirs and asks to be fed. You have only so many routines to stand in. If something knocks 2 of them down, you hold tighter to the 3rd. Evening came sooner because I pulled it in. I shut the curtains early and set a lamp on like uniforms needed for the dark. I read to Evan from a book where the bears know how to talk the way we do, but nobody questions it. He traced the pictures and said the names that turned the sound of his breath into soft language. He yawned and faked me out and then yawned again for real, and I carried him up and did the steps I always did, in the order that sounds foolish when you say it out loud, but had the power to make the night lie down if done right. He slept. Downstairs, the porch light made its island again. The dark at the step found its way toward it in a line that didn't match the position of the streetlight 3 houses down. I stopped looking like it was a thing I could shame with my stare and started noticing how it wanted to move, even when I didn't watch. I'd look away to put a dish in the rack, I'd look back and the shape had adjusted. It wasn't reaching, it wasn't threatening, it was learning. The first time the shape pulled itself into the seam that runs between boards and made itself a line, I felt something in the gum behind my back molar throb. It's the tooth I keep meaning to get looked at. My body is a filing cabinet where I keep paperwork I don't want to look at. Fear went there and sat. I told myself I wasn't a tier child and then realized how unhelpful that sentence has ever been. I slept in Evan's doorway again, not lying down this time, not comfortable, just posted like a guard who expects to be useless. I woke around the hour when traffic on Maple falls to nothing, and the one drunk who always forgets Wednesday is not Saturday drifts too far, right? And a tire bumps the curb, and the curb gives back with a thud like a book dropped from a chair. I woke because the house made a noise I hadn't yet learned, the click of the hook latch on the sliding door, finding itself up. There isn't a person who can hear that thing and not move. I held the breath that wanted to go ahead of me, stood, and went downstairs with the kind of steps where you make your feet forget how to be feet. The door had its curtain drawn, but the curtain was lighter around its edges than it had been. It was a simple trick to set my hand to the fabric and pull it enough to make a look aside. The porch bulb made its circle, and in that circle there were shadows where they ought to be, the chairs, the rails, and then the thing that wasn't those. It had reached the 3rd stair. It didn't rise. It widened, like oil does when it hits wood and goes hunger wide, new dark leaching into old. It didn't have a shape that meant anything we use. It wasn't a dog or a hand or a bat. It was a difference. It moved up the stair the way damp climbs a wall in a basement, when a wet spring has pushed groundwater into ways it hasn't used in years. It found the keyhole of the door, not with fingers, but with intention. Where the little circle of metal on the outside catches light from the porch lamp and sends it back, the circle went dull. It is a stupid thing to say that I knew it sniffed there, but that is what I knew. I took the flashlight and lifted it and put it on the seam where the door meets itself. The line glowed. The shape moved along it. It felt its way. It didn't press. It slid as a shadow can slide if you give it something to lean on. When the bulb inside the flashlight flickered because I had not shaken it the right way before, because these cheap ones go out whenever you need them, The dimming did a thing in the shadow's slow body, made it slip forward in a lurch you could miss if you blinked. I hit the flashlight with the meat of my hand and told it something in my head that wasn't to prayer. The beam steadied. The dark steadied back, like it had eyes it didn't yet want to blink. I stood that way until the feeling in my forearm went pins. I'm not young. When I put the flashlight on the counter and screwed the end off and on to reset its stubborn soul, the shape was still at the seam, but it had found a notch in the lower board, an old place where someone had sunk a screw and later pulled it, and the hole remained. It sat there. It learned that too. It's a strange thing to admit that by morning I had a small respect inside my fear for its patience, for its study. It could have been all hunger and no technique. It chose technique. It chose the stairs. It chose a screw hole. Stop talking about it like it's a someone, I told myself at the sink while I scrubbed a pan we hadn't really dirtied. Stop naming it into more than it is. Around 11, because I'm a person who makes solutions, even if they're bad ones, I took the lawn sprinkler that has a head like a tiny fan and set it on the porch near the steps and ran the hose to it and turned it on so the gentle spray covered the boards, and I let the water run until the wood shone dark and the seams ran full. I stood there like a fool with the hose in my hand and told myself this was science. If the thing was only a trick of light and surface and angle, water would scramble it. If it was a presence, the wet would make its creeping harder. It did neither. It held to its place by the screw hole, and the water made dark where it was dark, and made a puddle that reflected the porch bulb, and made a second small sun there. The shadow used that sun briefly, like we all use things that don't belong to us. I shut it off because wasting water during an advisory is like throwing food away in front of a person who tells you what their paycheck is. Evan watched from the door and asked with his face if he could go out. I said not today. He made his small O sound when he heard no and made his hands into fists and then relaxed them. He brought me his truck. He drove it up my forearm and told me in the way kids tell you they want to play that my conscience could be a road if I'd let it. I let it. I put him for a nap later, and the house took that nap with him, or tried to. I sat in the kitchen and waited to hear the hook click again, even though I had set it. It did not. The hook stayed put because my mind does games, and sometimes you get to win the small ones. The day's heat grew a crust at the top of the air. You could feel it on your teeth when you breathed through your mouth. I boiled the water for macaroni longer than I meant, and overcooked the noodles until they were the color of a classroom wall. He ate them anyway. He always eats more when milk goes off. I made myself a sandwich that would not remind me of anything, and found that everything reminded me of everything else now. The salt on the counter reminded me of the salt at the river, which reminded me of the warning signs they put up every few years after somebody dumps something they shouldn't. Tea, which reminded me of the advisory, which reminded me of the way the light is not a person but behaves like a person some days. In the early evening, while the heat still described itself to the yard, there was that sound the plant horn makes when a shift changes, but it came at the wrong hour. I checked my phone to make sure I'd remembered the time right. I had. The horn sounded again, lazy, then earnest, then nothing. Within 5 minutes, the town page had people asking if anyone else had heard it and whether they were testing something and whether this test involved the water or the power or the old siren they used to use before they got fancy with texts and surety. Somebody swore he'd seen a cloud push back against the smokestack, which is not a thing clouds do outside of the way clouds can be coaxed by the heat they meet. Everything is complaint and everything is faithful. People pick which to say out loud. The third night, I didn't sleep in the doorway. I slept across the threshold, not because I thought my body would stop anything, but because my body asked to be set in the place where I could tell myself I had done all the work I could do. I woke with my shoulder throbbing because the floor had reminded it that it is 43 years old. The hook was down. The curtain hadn't moved. The porch bulb had burned itself dimmer, the way they do just before they choose to go for good. I brewed coffee that tasted like it had seen worse and was preparing to tell me about it when a truck rumbled past. Heavy and low, and not the kind that hauls furniture for neighbors. You feel it in your underfoot when a truck like that goes. I stepped to the front window to see, and it was a utility truck with the emblem of the electric company whose lines run down our street. It paused at the end of the block, gave a little sigh, like a machine that likes its own idle, and went again. Another followed. The town had chosen to be industrious at an hour when the air had fought us all day, and while it cooled enough to make sweat mean something. Before noon, they had a man on a lift at our street's corner, scissoring up to the crossbar where the lines hang. He wore the big gloves and the hard hat that sweat pours from. He moved with the competence that makes you want to feed a person a lemon bar in thanks. I walked down that way with Evan, and we stood a distance back because you do not bring a boy into someone else's electricity. The man up there peered at a thing in a metal box and turned a tool and nodded to his partner below. He took a rag from his back pocket and wiped his neck, and the rag came away blacker than I thought a neck could make it. Next door, Mr. August came out in his undershirt like a person in a movie and shouted up one question too many. The lineman was polite for 2 tries and then told him he didn't have answers and the street would behave when it wanted to, and that sometimes wires get old like us. He meant nothing by it. He had a job, but the sentence hit me full on in the chest in a way that wasn't about wires. I turned and took Evan back up the block before I made a fool of myself weeping by a pedestal while my son held my hand and looked at me to see if tears were a thing that should be named. At home, in the cool of our kitchen, because we hadn't yet decided to cook anything or to make anything worse, I opened the drawer where I keep the receipts. They lay there like small white fish dead in a line, each one pretending to be a memory and none of them being the one I needed. I took the most recent and laid it next to the earlier from the morning before. I put the cost of milk on top of the cost of noodles and let math tell me something uncomplicated. It did. $41.17. I felt better than that number deserved to make me feel. I found myself tracing the name on the bottom of the paper. It was the name of the clerk in the morning, printed in heavy dots. Her name always made me think of the old country, even though she wasn't tea from there. I had the odd twitch to go down there and ask if her shift felt long today, if the lights hummed higher than usual, if anyone had put gum where gum shouldn't be. I wanted to ask if her reflection in the freezer doors had been braver than mine. I put the receipts back. I shut the drawer. The sound of the wood and wood meeting was the dull little slap that means you were keeping the world ordered as far as you can. By late afternoon, the extra shadow, which by now I had demoted to thing and then promoted to presence and then demoted again, I found by the porch. It had taken to keeping itself thin and beside, like an old dog learning where not to be stepped on. It went over the 3rd step again, then into the seam, and then it found the bottom edge of the door, and then it lay there very still, as if to teach me. There are ways when a thing can be patient and still count as movement. The sound at the edge of hearing came back then, like the small static on a cheap radio when a storm is coming, but the sky was clean and the storm in me had my name on it. I could taste it in that place under the tongue where adrenaline leaves a metal. The refrigerator gave a click and stopped and began again in a rhythm I could have set my heartbeat to. The baby monitor upstairs gave a hiss I knew to be normal, but which my brain wanted to call statement. This is where, in a story somebody else tells, a person calls a priest or a scientist or a hunter, and the door opens for someone with big tools or small miracles. I know the phone number of the woman at the county health who answered when I lost my mind 3 winters ago about a smell in the basement and told me where to set the meter, how long to let it read, and how to open a window if the number said ugly things. I know Barbara's ring. I know Pete would come if I said light and fix at him at the same time. Instead, I stood in my kitchen and set my hands palm down on the table and pushed until the table moved a fraction. And then I stopped and put my cheek to the wood because the cool helped. At dusk, the hour when our street always feels like a hallway, you could hear children being folded back into houses in the ways their families do it. A loud name, a sweet bribe, a count to 3. I stood by the glass and watched the dark at the seam become a straight line and then a wider one, and then lift itself up the height of a plank as if learning could make it light. It reached the inside of the door without opening it. This should be impossible if you're married to math. The inside shadow thinned near the floor and fattened near the table and eased itself toward the leg of the chair where I had dropped my bag. It knew what I had in my bag. It knew I had the little truck Evan had lost on Monday, and that I had put it there to give him during the Dr. US appointment to keep him still. It went there, and it learned the outline of the truck through the canvas. Light shifts in houses at this hour. The corner by the fridge went gold. The hallway went blue. The stairs forgot to be stairs and became a dark ladder. I went small again to see through the place where the curtain hadn't met itself flush. Outside, first fireflies rose from the grass in the neighbor's yard. I have loved that sight every year I've had a body. I did not love it then. Everything that glowed felt like a slot where something else could stick its finger in and pull. We slept that night after something like sleep. I lay in the doorway, and Evan turned in his bed and put his feet where his head had been, and a small part of my brain thought about the way fish in a bowl go head to tail and how they might remember the one direction of home even if the bowl spins. In the morning, light painted the room the color of old notebooks. Evan rose and called for juice because that is how he says it now. I carried him down, my back reminding me that he's heavier than his smallness announces. That day I chose denial, but I dressed it up in a way that would let me call it coping. I made us leave. We went to the park that still had both slides and swings that didn't squeal. We went the long way so I could avoid the corner where the lineman had stood. We did the little loop. He sat and watched ducks who had more courage than they needed. I packed crackers in a bag and told myself I had timed the day to keep us out through the hour when the thing in our door learned us best and bring us home into the early dark so I could master it with lamps. It sounded like strategy. It was avoiding a piece of our house. At the park, shadows do what shadows do: cut under metal, lengthen, fold under benches. I kept my eyes on the ground the way a person searching for a lost ring does, seeing every glint and none of them what they need. I did not see anything double itself where it shouldn't. I let my shoulders drop. He slid twice and kicked his shoes against the sand and made a sound with his lips that told me whether he would puff on dandelion seeds next week without my help. He will. We came back after the sun had lowered itself into the tree line where the town's edge begins. The house smelled different when we opened the door. Not bad, not good. Used in a way it hasn't been while we were gone. I set the bag and put him to the sink and ran the faucet and filled the cup and stopped because the faucet had a new knock under it, a hollow in the pipe where yesterday there hadn't been. I listened to the knock sound again and found it matched the cadence of the refrigerator's click, except a little delayed. I turned the faucet off. I watched the water circle the drain in a tired way. It is a ridiculous thing to hesitate before throwing water away because somebody somewhere says not to drink it. And I did it anyway. The porch made its breath in the screen where the curtain met it. The line at the bottom of the door had widened into the room by a span I couldn't lie to myself about. It held its edge clean as if it cared about sharpness. The corner at the table leg made a shape you could name if you had to. You could name it hand. I did not say that word out loud. I did not say any word that could make something else be possible. I gave Evan his little truck and let him drive it along the border between shadow and knot. He steered carefully, as if he knew he could help me by keeping the wheels straight. The truck's body lived in the dark, almost to a line where it's light. He rolled it out and in. He smiled. He did not give the thing his fear because he had none. Children are faithful and frightening. I felt myself split, one half wanting to pull him back and the other praising some small god that he was teaching me to stand in the light where shadow asks for you. Toward evening, Barbara texted, including 2 words I'd learned to read. Under the words, she wrote, "You good" means, "Are you breaking?" "You okay" means, "Are you pretending that you are?" I wrote back, "I'm okay." I set the phone upside down on the table. I picked it up because I was not okay. I wrote, "The thing is in the house." Then I held the screen and watched those letters look like they were about someone else's story and deleted them. Slow, like a girl undoing something she liked. The sun laid itself across our dining table like it did yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that, and all the days before. I learned to fear it. On the table, the receipt I'd folded twice and then unfolded twice lay where it had taken to staying like a cat who finds the only patch of warm on your body. The shadow that had become my teacher edged onto the paper, and the paper accepted it. The numbers printed there went dark under it and then revealed themselves again in the same ink. But in my head, I was sure a 7 had become a 1. And the sum had changed, and the town had changed, and we had changed, and I had always been like this. The night that followed was the night I told myself the truth about what the thing wanted. It had no mouth, but it had a lean. It had no hands, but it had a way of touching edges that made edges into not edges. It had patience that would outlast my ability to hold my eyes open. It had learned the hook. It would learn the lock. It would learn our bodies the way the house had, where the floor creaked, where the fan clicked, where the boy's feet went at 2 in the morning when he climbed into my bed without asking. It was not going to stop. There was no stopping to be had, only different arrangements of living with it and not letting it have the part of me that wanted to give it a name so it could answer when I called. I pulled a blanket to the living room floor and set myself there again, this time between the seam and the hallway, where I could lay a hand on the light switch, and know I could, and lay the other on the edge of the shape and feel nothing in that sensation, but the cool that light leaves behind when it goes. Around 1, the refrigerator cycled and cycled again, and didn't quit, and I thought I heard the small click of the lock, and I didn't, and my body jumped anyway. Around 2, the train came nearer than usual, and my house vibrated, and the shadow ran its desire toward the vibrations as if it was a dog catching a scent and meaning to track it to the cold end. Around 4, before the day decides itself, I dreamed with my eyes open, this is not unusual for me, that the shadow was my mother standing back in our old kitchen, and that she was the shape that had been with me since a girl, and that she had only lost her body and kept the moving part, and that it had followed me and now leaned in to see if Evan had her chin. I told myself I am cruel when I am tired, and that the dead are not shapes in rooms, not in this story, not in this house. Tears came anyway because my head knows what it knows, and my blood knows what it remembers, and they are not friends when the light is bent. The last day began like all of them do. Toast, small tantrum, coffee, the sound of a garbage can dragged over concrete 3 houses down. I went out to the porch early with the pretense that I was going to beat the thing to its study and confuse it. That is not how very much works. I stepped onto the boards and by reflex stepped around a spot as if there were a hole where there was none. Habit had made a groove. I put my hand on the rail and it moved a fraction where the screws had loosened. I told myself to find the screwdriver and tightened 3 of them, and the satisfying pull of metal to wood soothed me. The worn place under my hand was smooth as the knuckle of an old man. The town smelled like wet in the distance, though we had no rain. The maple dropped 3 helicopters and 1 landed in my hair. I plucked it and set it on the rail like an offering. This is the part where you think if I make enough moves of the body, it will drown out the moves of the mind. I took the hose down to the end of the yard and screwed it to the spigot behind the garage, where the pipe always squealed before it gave. The handle stuck and then gave, and the rush of water into the hose made a snake of it. I set the sprinkler to its lazy half circle and let it stitch the air. The water arced and shone and caught the light, and the light used it to draw new lines on the grass. The shadow that had been careful at the step was now something out there too, making a shape where no porch told it how wide to be. It found the watered patch and the dry patch and didn't mind either. It had learned the yard. Evan barreled toward the sprinkler in his heavy rubber boots he insisted on in every weather because they made him taller. He hit the spray and squealed because water on a small boy is always the oldest magic. I ran after him without making the choice to. I lifted him the way you do when you know your body will pay for it later. I set him on the drier edge where the hose made a small waver in the grass. He leaned forward. The shape leaned with him. It never touches when you're watching. It only thinks about it. I went to the fence and looked over at the neighbor's yard. Their yard had the same light and the same long shadows, and none of the skill my yard had acquired in being wrong. I let my head rest on the top plank. I wanted the neighbor's ordinary so bad I could chew it. The fence had that smell old wood has when it collects heat all morning and gives it back. I made an involuntary sound I hope he didn't hear. That afternoon I put Evan down and then sat at the kitchen table with my bills in their stack and my pen and the book where I write what's not in the computer, because the book makes me feel like I've done something permanent and the computer makes me feel like I've shouted into a well. I wrote the date, I wrote the amount. The shadow laid itself on the page. It didn't darken the ink. It didn't smudge any pencil. It ran under my hand as I wrote the check to the water company I wouldn't T-mail until I saw what the advisory said tomorrow. The shadow gave my knuckles a cool. I did not move my hand away. I signed, and the crossing of my last name, ST, ran border to border into dark and out the other side, and I felt like a person walking a road where half stretches over nothing and half over land. It occurred to me then that maybe I should test the only test I had left. Even if the thing is only light, it has trained me. Even if the thing is more than light, I can train it. There are only two of us in this house who understand the way a body becomes accustomed to a path. There's my boy. There's the presence. Addiction to repetition is a kind of faith. Maybe I could lay a new route in front of it. Maybe I could aim it somewhere else. Maybe I could open a door. I thought about the basement. I do not like the basement. It is a room made of cement and pipes and a millipede that has lived behind the hot water tank since we moved in. It smells like damp even when it's not damp. The window is a half window you cannot clean because you have to climb a shelf to reach it. The shadow would love it because it is mostly not light, but that window. Even in a room like that, light finds ways to teach you how edges could be different. I didn't like the idea, but I wanted to like it. I wanted to give the thing a place to be that wasn't near the boy. I opened the basement door. The stairs are unpainted and show every foot we give them. I went down and set the pull-string light, a bulb that makes its own little sun, swinging by accident. That swing made the basement fight between bright and dark with itself. The old washing machine's hose vibrated as if a mouse had run over it. The smell of soap lived in the corners in a way that made me think of a person I used to be who did laundry at night, to impress a man who thought folded shirts meant love. Water flecked the concrete dark where last week I overfilled the mop bucket. I went back up, lifted Evan, carried him to the top of the stairs and sat us both on the landing. He laid his head against my chest because stairs are always a rest to a boy. I put my hand on the railing. It was smooth where I had oil from 100 to and fro's. I looked down into the basement light and the basement dark and set my foot on the first step just enough to make the shadow at the threshold choose. It chose. It ran from the porch seam to the kitchen tile and onto the top stair and slid into what the house presented, down toward the concrete, one step and then the next. It behaved like a collection of nights. It went. I didn't exhale until it was at the third. Evan hummed. He always hums on stairs. The shadow reached the bottom, and at the floor, where the light from the bulb made a circle of bright, and the rest of the room was the color of old quarters, it spread into the corners. It found the window, it tested the window, it found the lowest rung of the shelf, and learned the grain of whatever old varnish a long-ago man had used there. It sat in the dip in the concrete, where feet had made a place, and the mop water had liked to go. It did not come back up in the 5 minutes I sat there, willing it to stay and hating it for doing the only favor I had asked. I put Evan down and he went back to his cars. I stayed a while at the top of those stairs like a captain surveying the only calm they can assure themselves before a storm they see on the ocean and pretend isn't he aiming at them personally. I closed the basement door easy and set the old deadbolt they'd have put there, for who knows why. Who locks a basement? Maybe people like me. The bolt made a sweet, decisive noise. The sound traveled into the frame. For the first time in days, the hour between 5 and 7 did what it said it would. The light made dinner look nicer than it was. The fridge hummed on a rhythm I remembered. The fan clicked the way it clicked. Evan's laughter sounded like a thing that would repeat tomorrow. I set plates. He ate and reached for more. I reached for the salt. I put it down. I wiped the counter, and the sponge made a circle, and the circle made sense. The day gave itself to the kind of ordinary that makes you want to cry. I didn't. I only stood there and understood that the world was letting me pretend again. After bath, I brought him down for a second and set him by the sliding door because the air had turned in the way it turns after heat, carrying something of cool. He pressed his nose to the glass and blew his fog and drew a circle with his finger. It had been 2 hours. I let myself look. The seam by the porch was empty. The bottom of the door was the bottom of the door. The chair's shadow, the rails. The maple did the maple thing. Somewhere a neighbor laughed in that first beer voice. I set my cheek to the glass where he had and let the house-esque cool come into me. I put him to bed with a story longer than a man would bother with. And after his eyelids went to the place they go when his breath settles, I slid my feet down the hall and stood at the top of the basement stairs with my ear. I could hear the hum of the bulb and the small, oddly happy trickle that happens when one pipe in the bowels decides to make its own music. I heard a knock. It could be the water. It could be the house. It could be what I wanted to hear. I started to plan how I'd coax this thing to live downstairs for good. I thought about setting a light there for always. I thought about the bill. I thought about asking Barbara to come and tell me she saw nothing. I thought about calling, then not calling, then calling again. At past, while I stood at the window with my hands in the dishwater because hands in water make the rest of me less of a live wire, I looked up and saw across my yard a shape stand where a person would if they had just come through the back gate. My gate was latched. I had latched it. The maple had thrown her hand over that spot like she covered the rest of the yard, and the shadow from the tree made a pattern that would conceal anything a little if it wanted. The shape bent its head. It had the size of a person. It had the wrong proportions, the shoulders too narrow, the neck too long, or the neck not the problem but the tilt. It didn't move forward. It didn't wave. It didn't make the mistake of saying my name. I stood in the sink to my elbows and let the water go warm to cold and never looked away. I tell myself even now that I'm sure it wasn't a someone being someone outside of their right. It was the dark that had been in my house and had found itself a body outside. And now that it had learned the steps and the handle and the lock and the shape of the bottom of the door, it thought to learn me. The thought makes me a person I will live with because I have no other person to be. If it was a someone out there I can call. If it wasn't, I cannot. The porch light burned itself to death then. It made that half sigh they make when they give up, and the circle of the porch retreated a foot. The body outside did not step in when the light went down. It let the dark of the yard become my yard. The sprinklers on 2 houses away started, one then the other in a sync they never have, and the spray cut lines through the evening I'd never seen before. Anything can be a ruler if you lay it right. I dried my hands badly and went to the sliding door and put my palm to the glass. The glass was cooler than the rest of the world. On it, the fog of my breath widened into a space I could draw in, and like a child, I wrote my own name there, not to claim the house, but to tell the house I remembered who I was. A bug took itself from one side of the frame to the other in the painful stepway bugs do when they know screens make a puzzle. The dark at the gate waited. "I see you," I said in the kitchen voice that is not for scaring anyone and not for soothing anyone, but for saying what is true without giving the truth more furniture than it needs. The figure did not answer because that's not what figures do. The shadow under it lengthened, even though the light was not coming up. The maple S leaves quivered like someone a street over had opened a door and made a draft. I slept that night in my bed because I had to know what it would do when I was not a guard. I do not pretend there was courage in it. It was a tiredness the size of this town. It was a fear I was ready to test. I woke around the hour the birds start and the air is older than the day. And I woke because the house made the smallest sound, something like a sigh from a person who forgot they were in company and allowed it to escape. I held still. The baby monitor gave the most reassuring sound in my life, the regular little ocean of Evan S. breath. I did not go downstairs. I let the sound happen again. It was the basement door. It opened in the way old doors open when they have been trained, not by hands, but by repetition. Hinges give and accept. Things go where they want. Then the sound of a step on concrete. Then nothing. The bulb hummed. The bulb hummed until it did not. The house had more dark in it than before, and I let it. I counted to measure if I was still a person in a world that had numbers. I got to 100 because that is where I stop, and because we only think we choose such places. Around daylight, I stood and went to the top of the basement stairs and flicked the switch and found the bulb would not choose to light. That was a small thing and a big thing. I stood there with my hand on the rail, and then I went down into the dark because I had to know which of my stories were the more useful one to tell myself. The concrete was cool. The smell was bigger. I reached the pull string and pulled, and something in the mechanism made the chain skip without catching. In the room, the dark was not complete. The little window threw a band of tender light across the opposite wall, and in that band, I saw the shape of a shoulder and a head not flush, but set away from the wall. I let my eyes be honest. The shape did not move. It was not a person. It was the shadow with enough body to tell me what had always been true. Since the first afternoon, it touched my boy's shadow in the yard. It could stand where it chose to stand, and it would take its time. It would stand there in my downstairs and wait until I learned its patience, or until my boy learned its name. I felt my way back up the stairs and shut the door, and set the bolt, and set my back to it, and slid down, and set my hands to my face, and said again these words for my house and my head, in a tone meant to make them both hold steady. "I see you." When Evan woke, he came and put his hands on my cheeks and pushed them until my mouth made a shape he liked, and then he laughed, and then he called me a word that means everything you put in it if you let it. And I got up, and I made pancakes that had their own faces in them because the butter is reckless, and I put his syrup in a cup and let him pour. The day moved like days move when you have decided to live in a house that has a downstairs you aren't going to fix this morning. The light came in and did what it does. The shadow downstairs learned my names for things. Cold, hot, yes, no. The town kept its advisories, and the linemen did their lifts, and the plant chickened out of its own horn, and the water smelled fine again. And still we had this. I will tell you what we have now, and that it is little and it is big. The sun still spreads itself across our backyard, and my boy still chases little pieces of life that have no weight and then laugh when they are gone. His shadow keeps near him the way shadows do when you are 3. If I stand near the glass and let my eyes soften, I can find the other line where it keeps its practice, learning the shapes we make. It is more patient than I am. It will wait for him to learn it the way he has learned stairs and spoons and the rhythm of a traffic light that isn't T-right. It will wait as long as it takes. At night, in the kitchen, when the fridge hums and the fan clicks and the neighbor's last cigarette makes a little blue at his porch, I stand at the sink and hold the bowl a second longer under the water than it needs. And I watch the seam by the sliding door and my own reflection in the glass and the house's reflection and the way the dark finds the places between, the things we lay our hands on. And I nod, like a person nods at a co-worker they can avoid or a relative who has moved in without being asked. The basement is part of my house, and the light is part of my day, and the shadow is part of my body now, because these things happen quietly, and you decide you won, to be the sort of person who refuses what says true. In the morning, I open the blinds, and in the evening, I close them. Evan grows into his shoes and then out. The mailbox fills and empties. The receipts go in their drawer. The hose leaks at the spigot if I don't hold it just so. The traffic light at Maple holds yellow longer than it should, and then forgets itself, and then remembers. The substation hum is something I hear now, even when it doesn't hum, because the mind learns keeping. The man at the hardware store sells me a bulb with a longer life on the package, and I put it in my bag and do not commit myself to believing that that means anything. There have been 2 nights since the shape took the basement that I have woken with the surety that something stood at the top of those stairs on my side of the door, a darkness not darker than the dark, but shaped like the absence of one object against another. Evan slept. The house made its 1,000 accommodations tonight. I stayed in my bed and let the thing go or not. I thought about the moment in the yard when the extra shadow peeled off the first for the first time, and I thought about how a mother learns more than any hammer knows about what can be pushed back into the wood, and what stain will always show if you look just right. The yard is bright again this afternoon. The maple draws itself in the grass. Evan learns a new game with a stick that is a stick, and also a horse, and also a broom, and also a spear, when he thinks no one is watching him be wild. He runs, and his shadow runs, and the second shadow keeps to the edge of what we would consider good behavior. I watch from the kitchen, my hand flat on the glass. My breath makes a fog neither of them uses to talk back. When he falls, both shadows crouch. When he laughs, both rise. Sometimes the extra moves first now. It knows the punchline before we say it. I have stopped calling it malevolent in my head because that word gives it teeth. I call it what it is, a presence that has taken to living with us, taking small pieces of our edges for its make, asking nothing but to be recognized. This is the part where I'm supposed to offer you an ending. I do not have one of those you can clap shut. I sweep my floors twice a week, and sometimes 3. I fix what I know how to fix and forgive what I haven't learned yet. I keep the bed under the window because the room wants it there, and not because the light in the morning makes me happy. I set my cheek to the glass when the afternoon is gold, like the inside of a wheat loaf, and watch my boy run, while the second shape below him keeps its distance by an inch we've taught it to keep. He is, for now, a perfect miniature of joy. The shadow we've come to know stands a step behind, a part of us we didn't choose and will not ever fully understand, and the house hums the way it hums, and the town breathes, and the glass under my hand is cool. I can stand here long as the day lets me, watching, measuring, and letting the uninvited tenant in the basement learn the slow, recognizable rhythms of our life until it knows us better than we do. And when the porch light goes, and it will, and the night pushes its shoulder into the frame, I will latch the hook because that's what the hook is for, and I will say nothing that lets the darkness believe it has been named. I will do dishes by the sound, and my boy will sleep, and I will keep my watch without heroics, and the second shadow will stand where it has chosen to stand, and all of it will be completely real. If this story lands with you, please like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who enjoys quiet, literary horror.